Abraham Lincoln rarely spoke about happiness not because he did not understand it, but because he lived long enough to know how fragile that word becomes when life starts taking things away. He did not promise peace of mind, fulfillment, or comfort, and he never suggested that pain arrives with a lesson neatly attached to it. Instead, he spoke about endurance, about patience that does not announce itself, and about holding on to dignity when everything familiar quietly collapses. What if the purpose of certain periods in life is not to be understood at all, but simply to be endured without becoming smaller inside? What if strength is not about feeling confident, but about refusing to let bitterness decide who you become? And what if the calm we admire in men like Lincoln was not confidence, but discipline practiced in silence? While the losses kept coming, when people search for wisdom, they often expect reassurance, a way to feel better about what they are going through, or a sentence that makes the weight on their chest lighter. But Abraham Lincoln never approached life from that direction. He understood something uncomfortable long before most people are willing to admit it. Not every phase of life exists to make sense, and not every wound arrives with an explanation that can be understood in the moment. Lincoln did not chase happiness because he knew happiness is unstable when it becomes the main goal. He focused instead on staying upright internally, even when circumstances offered no relief, no clarity, and no guarantee that things would improve anytime soon. In his world, endurance mattered more than optimism, and patience was not a virtue meant to be admired, but a necessity for survival. There is a quiet strength in accepting that some chapters are not meant to be solved, only lived through without surrendering your values. Lincoln did not ask whether life was being fair because fairness was never the standard he used to measure his actions. He asked whether he was still acting with integrity while everything around him felt unstable, and whether he could carry responsibility without demanding emotional comfort in return. This way of thinking is difficult because it removes the illusion that suffering must always lead somewhere immediately. It suggests that dignity is not something you feel, but something you practice repeatedly, even on days when nothing seems to justify the effort. And it forces a question most people avoid: if happiness disappears tomorrow, would you still know how to live without becoming resentful? Most people believe that pain weakens them, but pain itself is rarely the thing that causes lasting damage. What truly changes a person is the way they react when suffering removes control, certainty, and the sense of being protected by life. Some collapse inward, others grow loud and defensive, and many begin to explain themselves endlessly, as if understanding alone could restore what has been lost. Lincoln understood that reaction is where character quietly reveals itself. He learned that when external control disappears, the only remaining form of strength is internal discipline, the ability to delay emotional release, restrain impulse, and choose restraint over expression. Silence, in his case, was not emptiness or avoidance, but a deliberate refusal to let pain dictate his behavior. There is a common misunderstanding that endurance means suppression, that patience means denying what hurts. In reality, endurance is the ability to feel the weight fully while refusing to let it distort judgment, relationships, or self-respect. Lincoln did not escape grief or disappointment. He carried them without allowing them to turn into bitterness or self-pity. This level of control is uncomfortable because it offers no immediate relief. It does not reward you with praise, sympathy, or reassurance, and it often leaves you alone with your thoughts longer than you would prefer. Yet this is precisely where quiet strength forms, in the space where emotion is acknowledged but not obeyed, and where dignity becomes a daily decision rather than a personality trait. The question is not whether pain will arrive, because it always does. The real question is whether, when it does, you respond in a way that preserves who you are, or in a way that slowly erodes you from the inside. There are a few truths about life that sound simple on the surface, but become heavier the longer you live with them, and Lincoln's life forces us to confront them without decoration or comfort. These are not ideas meant to inspire confidence or hope, but realities that shape a person who intends to remain intact while everything else is uncertain. The first truth is this: you do not need to be liked in order to do what is right. Most people quietly adjust their values to preserve approval, mistaking acceptance for safety and popularity for correctness. Lincoln lived through long stretches of criticism, misunderstanding, and resistance. Yet he did not treat public affection as a compass for his decisions. He understood that being respected later often requires being resisted first, and that doing what is necessary can isolate you in ways that feel deeply personal, even when the choice itself is impersonal and principled. The discomfort of being disliked is temporary, but the consequences of avoiding responsibility last far longer than the momentary relief of fitting in. The second truth is more difficult. To accept pain does not make you weak, but surrendering control over your reactions does. Life does not ask permission before removing what matters to you, and it rarely pauses to allow emotional recovery before demanding more. Lincoln did not respond to pressure with impulsive expression or emotional exhibition. Instead, he slowed himself down internally, creating space between what he felt and what he allowed himself to do. This restraint was not emotional numbness, but a refusal to let anger, despair, or resentment dictate behavior. Strength, in this sense, is not intensity, but steadiness, the ability to remain measured when circumstances encourage collapse. The third truth is perhaps the hardest for modern minds to tolerate. Some phases of life are meant to be endured, not understood. There is a deep cultural obsession with meaning, with the belief that every hardship must reveal its purpose quickly in order to be bearable. Lincoln did not insist on immediate clarity. He allowed uncertainty to exist without demanding answers from it. He moved forward while questions remained unresolved, trusting that understanding, if it arrived at all, would come later, shaped by time rather than urgency. Endurance then becomes an act of quiet courage, a willingness to remain present without forcing resolution where none yet exists. These truths do not offer comfort, but they offer stability. They remove the illusion that life must always feel coherent in order to be lived well, and they suggest that dignity is maintained not through confidence or clarity, but through consistent restraint when both are absent. There are moments in life when effort does not produce visible progress, when relationships strain without explanation, and when responsibility continues to demand energy long after motivation has disappeared. In these periods, people often assume something is wrong with them, as if confusion or emotional exhaustion were signs of failure rather than natural responses to sustained pressure. Lincoln's approach suggests something quieter and more grounded. Not every season requires action, clarity, or emotional resolution. There are times when the most honest response is restraint, when maintaining composure matters more than expressing frustration, and when continuing forward with dignity is enough. This is especially true in solitude, when there is no audience to validate endurance and no immediate reward for staying steady. Silence in these moments is not weakness, but a form of self-respect, a decision to conserve energy instead of scattering it through reaction. Many people break not because life becomes unbearable, but because they demand understanding too early. They pressure themselves to extract meaning before time has done its work, and in doing so, they exhaust what little stability remains. Lincoln's life implies a different rhythm. Endure first, reflect later, and resist the urge to force coherence onto experiences that are still unfolding. In practice, this means accepting that some days are not meant to feel productive, hopeful, or resolved. They are meant to be carried through with consistency, restraint, and a refusal to compromise personal standards simply to escape discomfort. Endurance, when practiced this way, becomes less about suffering silently and more about protecting what remains intact within you. Abraham Lincoln did not leave behind a method for living well, and he never promised that endurance would feel meaningful while it was happening. What he showed quietly and consistently is that it is possible to lose much of what matters and still refuse to become smaller in character, harsher in judgment, or careless with responsibility. His strength was not built on confidence or clarity, but on the steady choice to remain measured when life offered no reassurance in return. There are moments when life does not ask you to understand, improve, or overcome anything at all. It asks only that you remain upright internally, that you do not surrender dignity for relief, and that you allow time to do the explaining later, if it ever does. In those moments, endurance is not a weakness or a delay, but a form of quiet respect for yourself. The question then is not how quickly you can make sense of what is happening to you. It is whether, when meaning is absent and comfort is unavailable, you can still respond in a way that leaves you intact when the moment finally passes.